So thank you once again, Dr. Om and Ms. Ritika, for joining us, who are the experts on this subject. And without further delay, I will go on to ask my first question to Dr. Om. So Dr. Om, we've been reading a lot about this, but with your experience and background, can you please tell us how COVID exactly gets transmitted?
Um, Insofar as transmission of COVID is concerned, there are only about three routes that we know for sure. The commonest is, the droplet. That means somebody who's got the COVID will be coughing or sneezing. The second route is by what we call the fomite. That means somebody who is infected, their secretions are lying on a table, on a doorknob, or a lift button. That is then keeping the virus there, and other people are going to be using that surface. And the third route, of course, is when you don't have any contact with any of these things. That's what we call we don't know how this person is affected in the community. So the transmission is by droplets, which is large drops of these secretions of somebody who's infected. There are reports about COVID being present in people's body fluids for much longer. As to how long, is also a debate. It can be as little as about 10 days, as much as about 60 days, and it can be shed in number of body secretions. But that is still a matter of subject of being evaluated. So, by and large, this is how it gets transferred from person to person.
So, Doctor, there was a very specific question from the audience which had come to us that suppose if I have COVID and if I'm wearing a mask and I'm talking to somebody who is also wearing a mask, is there a risk of that person getting transmitted COVID through me?
So that percentage established, if there are two people wearing a mask and keeping the minimum distance, there is a rule of 2 by 2. That means less than 2 minutes of interaction and more than 2 meters of distance. If you're able to keep that figure in mind and you're wearing a mask, the chance of one person passing on the infection to another is between 1.5 to 2%. 1.5 to 2%. That's why masks are very important. They're very important. It's probably going to become a way of life for us, in the foreseeable future. As long as COVID is there, it is nobody knows really. Nobody knows, but it may not have the same urgency that it has right now. But it could be around for a long period of time. I don't see it going anywhere now. But if you're wearing a mask and the person you're talking to is also wearing a mask, keeping the distance, that chance is less than 2%.
Got it, Doctor. And since we are on the subject of masks, Doctor, there are so many different types of masks that we are hearing about, and I think some of our WhatsApp groups are also flooded now with fancy masks and what all for kids. So can you please tell us that what is the correct type of mask to wear to prevent or mitigate the risk of transmission?
Right, that's a very important question. What kind of mask should you wear? So you'll probably hear a lot about N95 masks. You'll also probably hear about N99 masks. Okay, N95, it means that the kind of layers that are present in the mask, that will take care of 95% of that size of particles, whether it's a virus or anything else. It will take care of 95%. That's how the N95 comes. The N99 is a little bit more, extensive, exhaustive. The point is, what you probably need is two things to keep in mind. The mask that you wear, whatever mask that you wear, should be a snug fit. You cannot have parts of your nose or your mouth exposed or open. So that's why it goes through the mucous membrane of any cavity. That means your eyes, your nose, your mouth are the most common, but it can go through other routes as well. The commonest mask that would be helpful to you, especially if you're going into a place where you are going to be interacting with other people or you cannot keep the same distance, is going to be the N95 or the 3-ply surgical mask. The N95 is a little bit of an overkill, and I'll tell you why. Because, you are going to be wearing the mask in a day's time. When you're out of your house and in the community, you're going to be wearing it for maybe 3, 4, 6 hours. It is not physiological for you to be breathing your own breath, because that is not the process of breathing that we are structured. You need to be having the release of carbon dioxide from your breath. That should not be going back into your system. So the surgical mask is probably the best halfway measure that we can use. where it gives you the protection and you're still not, claustrophobic or, being suffocated by your own kind of apertures. The surgical fly mask in the time that you're likely to be in the community or in the office or in a local train or whatever it is that you feel is going to be the time that you will be interacting or keeping a minimum distance with people. The safest thing is the surgical mask. There isn't a great deal of flow for the cloth mask, although there may be some evidence that would help. If you don't have an option, well, you probably have to take what is best available. But what is advised is that you keep the surgical mask with you, the 3-ply surgical mask, and you use it only at the time when you are at risk, when you are out of your own home, so that you are not passing on or not at risk for getting infection.
Understood, Doctor. Doctor, there has been some debate about this and some back and forth, perhaps from WHO as well. But what people want to know that can an asymptomatic person also transmit COVID?
Yes, you can, because you don't necessarily need to have symptoms when you're shedding the virus. Remember, this is a brand new virus. Okay? When we say brand new, we've known about it for less than 5 or 6 months. End of December, January of this year. It's too little a time for anybody to make a definitive kind of a statement as to exactly how this virus is going to be. Can an asymptomatic person shed the virus? Yes, definitely, that's possible. How likely is that going to be? That would depend on a number of factors. And that is why, even if you don't have symptoms, you're advised to be conducting your affairs with a mask on your face. You should be getting tested only if you're symptomatic and not otherwise. Because I'll talk about that when the next set of questions come. But the answer to the question that you just asked me, the answer is yes. Person who is not having symptoms can also be shedding the virus.
Got it, Doctor. And Doctor, now, with the easing of lockdown, and we've seen that in some cities, even, restaurants have opened up, malls have opened up. Is the probability of transmission higher in air-conditioned environments vis-a-vis non-air-conditioned environments? I mean, today even commercial establishments have opened up. So that is another query from the audience.
Right. So, there are clear guidelines about what can be done in a room that is having an air conditioner, right? So, if it is that this air is getting circulated at other parts, if you've got a central air conditioning, if you've got an air conditioning that is being used to cool 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms, that kind of structure, then you have to be a little more careful. If indeed there is somebody in the one room that may pass on the infection to another, theoretically, yes, it is definitely possible because it is a small virus. It can go through aerosol. That is why you are not recommended to give nebulizers in hospitals, or to minimize the nebulizer in a hospital or in any of these places, only so that it does not get aerosolized. That means these particles are not floating in the air. The chance of a virus like this being able to communicate from one person to the other is far higher in the humidity. That means if you're in a non-air conditioned room, that chance is much higher, because that enjoys the total amount of humidity. In a place like Mumbai, the total humidity is anywhere from about 70 to 90% at any given point in time. In an air conditioned room, that humidity falls to about 20 to 30%. So that chance is a little bit lesser, significantly lesser, not little bit, but it's still there. But it is much higher in the community.
Wow, okay, that answer actually, is very helpful, because I think most of us perhaps thought the other way around, that, we were at a greater risk in an air-conditioned environment.
Not been proven as yet. That's not been proven as yet. There are guidelines, but they are applicable to the virus of this size. This is an RNA virus, which is a tiny virus. It's not a big virus like say hepatitis, right? Which is a DNA virus. But without getting into a lot of medical technicalities, smaller viruses may be able to go through smaller surfaces or outlets, but they also need a particular kind of environment to survive and thrive. That does not happen very much in an environment which is closed and not having this kind of humidity. But like I say again, we may change our understanding of this part as time goes on. As of now, that has not been demonstrated. As of now.
Understood, Doctor. Fine. Doctor, since more and more people will now start commuting to work, apart from wearing a mask, can you please suggest what other measures can be taken by us to protect and guard ourselves against COVID?
Two other things that you might want to keep in mind is to have a sanitizer in your pocket. Any surface that you touch, any surface, you should assume it is contaminated unless proven otherwise. That is the one thing. And the aspect of social distancing cannot be overemphasized. You must try and keep the distance as much as possible. And for the shortest period of time, come inside that 2. So the 2 by 2 that I mentioned earlier is 2 meters. If you are going to be having a proximity of less than 2 meters, then you should be interacting with this person for less than 2 minutes. So a hand sanitizer, a face mask, and the social distancing are probably the 3 biggest measures that you can employ to make sure that you're not going to.
Doctor, we've also been reading a lot about, immunity boosters and several different types of medications around this, right? From homeopathy medicines like arsenic and camphor to zinc and vitamin C. Can you please recommend what type of medication can be taken to boost immunity and what are the medicines that we should stay away from?
Okay, so look, boosting immunity, it's like saying that if I give vitamin C to a 6-year-old child, in 1 month I'm going to make him as strong as a 16-year-old man. Right? Immunity is a process. It's a way of life. It has to be evaluated and made sure that from your stage of life, you are as fit as is possible. That is the way that you should be approaching it. So if you start to take, say, vitamin C or any other immune process building food, that is going to take between 3 and 4 months before you start seeing results. Now, does zinc help? Does magnesium help? Yes, they both help. They are known to prevent the virus that once attaches itself into the receptor of your neck or your chest or your lungs. Before it gets into the cell and starts to multiply, there is a role that zinc and vitamin C and magnesium all will help. But they are not going to help overnight. If you start taking them tomorrow morning, then you'll probably start to see a perceptible difference only by, say, October or November of this year, and that you probably find that your immunity is much stronger over a period of time. These are processes, like I said, you cannot start a process to say, look, I'm going to be fitter in 1 week's time. It doesn't work in that way. Immunity is a way of life. You can quantify your immunity. So there are people that I know that I'm looking after who are very fit 85-year-olds. And there are those that I'm looking after who are very unfit 25-year-olds. So it has got to do with a number of things, not just medical conditions, not just other medications, but also your way of life, your sleeping habits, the amount of stress that you take back to home, to your work, the amount of alcohol that you consume, the kind of smoking that you do, the kind of personality that you are. Okay, all of this will impact on your own response. If you're a natural warrior, if you're somebody who is a type A personality, then your immunity is always going to be challenged, always, because immune responses take their signals from your own mind, your own brain. Yeah, so when you say that I am immune competent at whatever age you are, you have to approach it in all these ways. So immunity can be measured and evaluated. One part of my practice is immunology. I do that for a number of people where I say that yes, we can look at building up your immunity, but it's a process. It can't be done with one medication. It requires a certain kind of a blood test, and it requires an overall understanding of where you are in your life. Can be held, but not, look, any of these things work only if you want to make it work. So there is a way to approach it. It can be done, but it's a complex procedure. It's not simply a blood test, but it is very doable. Insofar as arsenic or other compounds are concerned, I'm not competent to comment on that. That's homeopathy. That's not my area of expertise. I think we'll have to ask that question to somebody who can answer the questions on that.
Got it, doctor. So what you're saying, it's a more holistic approach which is needed, and it's a long-term approach which is required to boost one's immunity.
Sure.
Doctor, the other question is that, now that we'll again start commuting to work and, our level of exposures are going to increase, we are going to interact with multiple people. So while we are outside, we are wearing a mask. Are we required to wear the mask once we are home as well? Because we could be asymptomatic and therefore there is a risk of transmission to the family members. So what are your views on that, doctor?
At some stage, you have to find a balance. Okay? You can't treat the rest of your life wearing a mask. If you are in an environment where you're reasonably certain that nobody is infected, you don't need the mask. Unless, of course, you're in a public place, you're on a bus or a train, you're in a jam-packed office, or other places where your proximity and the duration of exposure is high. But in the comfort of your own home, if nobody is symptomatic, it's reasonable not to be wearing a mask. It's not going to offer you any additional advantage. But a lot of these things, a lot of what is being written out or set out as guidelines are only to give you a boundary so that you should not make a mistake. But it does not say please don't use your common sense. Using your own judgment about what is going to be a possible risk. If you feel there is a risk, by all means wear a mask. But you can't, like I said, you can't keep wearing a mask.
Got it, doctor. In a similar context, people want to know that if they're going out for a walk in the garden and they're brisk walking or jogging, they feel that the mask is rather restrictive in nature. So, can you please let us know that in such situations where one is working out or exercising outdoors, what should they do pertaining to the mask?
So again, like I said, it is not physiological to have an aperture on your face. That is not going to allow you to breathe out those things that are physiologically meant to be breathed out. It's not physiological. It's not the way our structure, our bodies are structured. You will need to see what is optimal. So if you are in a gym where there are people within about couple of feet next to you, in the first place that should not be the distancing, because the gyms that are in housing societies or such places, those places where we are looking at having time slots available for people who can go and use the gym at that time. In an open space like a garden or the road where you're running, there again you have to make sure that the mask is not going to lead into a situation where you are going to be suffocated by your own exercise regimen. Again, this is a lot of basic common sense. You don't need to be wearing a mask all the time, but you do need to ensure that it's not in a situation where you are exposed to other people. You need to be having that moderation in your activities, whether it is running on the street or walking in a garden or working on the treadmill. All of these require your own understanding of how close are you to a person and what are the chances of this person infecting.
Fine, doctor. We have all been purchasing a lot of items, from outside, like groceries, fruits, vegetables. Doctor, what is the best way to sanitize these items?
All right, so those things that are edible, the one thing that is uniformly accepted is that before you consume anything like a fruit or a vegetable, you should be using something like potassium permanganate, which is a few crystals that you soak the groceries in a little bit of water. You put these 3 or 4 crystals, it turns into a particular shade of violet. You leave it that way for about 15 minutes, and that is probably the best sanitization that you can do. That is probably the best. Okay? You can use other things like wholesome cleaning. There are people who are very fastidious. I'm not sure if there is a number of things that will offer scientific advantage. They're only probably going to be giving you the comfort in your mind that I've done more than what I require. So long as you are able to ensure that the maximum possible benefit will come from any one thing, I would have to say it is passion, either a fruit or a vegetable before you.
In some housing societies now, newspapers have been permitted. Do you think, doctor, it's safe to start reading newspapers in the physical form?
See, this is something I say often when I'm talking to colleagues or other people across. Infectious diseases is treatable, but anxiety is incurable. Okay, there is no cure for anxiety on the whole planet. Right? There's absolutely no evidence that the virus exists on papers. Right? If there is any scientific evidence, by all means, keep away from papers. There isn't any. In that case, you'll have to stop using currency notes as well. You'll have to stop the papers as well. So how many things are you going to stop because that's in your mind that look, you may be touching the virus? The time you touch a paper or a newspaper that is going to be read by somebody else, use those few drops of the sanitizer on your hands, and that you ask the person across in your own house who is going to be looking after you to use the same sanitizer. That's probably all that you can do, besides making sure you're not doing any other thing to increase the risk of infection. But insofar as scientific evidence is concerned, there is not one shred of evidence to say that the virus is transferred by either currency notes or newspapers or any such thing. I wouldn't discourage that. It is perfectly normal to be reading a newspaper the first thing in the morning before
Great. I think many of us will be relieved to hear that, and thank you for some of those practical tip, doctors. Um, Doctor, the coronavirus cases are increasing day by day in India, even though the lockdown has been comparatively long compared to some of the European countries. So, in your view, why is this happening?
This is the natural history of the disease. If you look at the genetic fingerprinting of the strain that we are seeing, okay, it is just called the A2A. That is the natural history of the A2A. This is how it is expected to be present and then propagate and then maybe come into a stage where it is not as aggressive as it is right now. So this amount of numbers that you're seeing is more reflective about the kind of situation where this virus is. These numbers are going to be, a little bit frightful for the next few weeks, maybe a couple of months. Mumbai in itself is probably going to see a decline, which is what we are seeing in public hospitals. The numbers that are coming to a hospital like, say, Kasturba Hospital, that I am attached, or to a major public hospital like KEM or Nair Hospital, those numbers are not that urgent. The number of people who are mildly symptomatic coming in for evaluation or admission, they are not that urgent as to what it was maybe 7 days ago or 10 days ago. So the numbers in Mumbai are more under control. That can't be said for the rest of Maharashtra and places like say Delhi or Telangana, Hyderabad. They are going through their peak right now. So in the next maybe a couple of weeks. So different parts in the country will have different dynamics and demographics of the numbers. But this is more or less expected around the expected levels. I think that rather than go on to the numbers, what you probably need to be, if indeed you need to be looking at something, it is the number of people who require isolation and the number of people who need to go on to that. Because, about 85-90% of people who get COVID, they may not even notice that they've got a COVID. You might pass it as a common cold, a bit of a runny nose, a bit of a headache, a sore throat, body ache kind of thing. And that you may have no symptoms at all. So that is going to be 85-90%. The remaining 10%, in the remaining 10%, about 5% people will require some kind of intervention, some kind of hospital. The last 5% may require admission, and the last 2 or 3% may require to go to the ICU. I think that not to be focusing on the numbers, but to actually be looking at the people who need to go to a hospital for admission and to ICU or
Sure, doctor. So that actually brings me to the next bucket. Like I said, that what do you do once you think you have symptoms of COVID or you've been detected with COVID? So the first question is that if I think that I have symptoms of COVID, what should be my first step?
So again, if you think you've got symptoms, or the doctor thinks you've got symptoms, first thing is speak to your doctor, right? Because like I said, COVID as it is can very easily mimic a normal influenza. That means a cough or a fever or a headache or a body ache. It does not mean that everybody who's got this kind of symptoms is going to be having COVID. So speak to your doctor, and only if your doctor feels that yes, you need to be tested, get yourself tested through a throat swab. That result should be back in about 24 hours time. You may also get other investigations done to find out how much of the risk is there in your system. So there are people who have uncontrolled metabolic diseases. That means you are somebody who is a hypertensive, who's got high blood pressure, and that is uncontrolled. You don't take your medications regularly. There's somebody who's got airways disease like bronchial asthma, or there is somebody who's got an underlying immunocompromised state, something that requires a steroid that will depress your immunity, or a cancer, malignancy, conditions like HIV, diabetes. All of these conditions, if they are not controlled, then your risk is higher. In that case, if you have symptoms, you should speak to your doctor, or even you should simply say, I want to test. It's more an understanding of where you are with your health. If you are an otherwise fit, healthy person, doesn't matter what age you are. If you are a fit, healthy person, then you should not get alarmed unless the symptoms that you are having are increasing. So the things to watch out for is for having like a shortness of breath, or something that is not explainable to your own system, and you know that this is not normal for you, by all means get yourself tested. Because COVID is something that you need to first exclude before you go on to other things. So that is the situation that you must either talk to your doctor or go to your closest hospital and get yourself tested. Other than that, if you don't have the risk factors that I have just mentioned, and you're simply having something that behaves like a common cold, it is reasonable to wait for at least 12 hours, 24 hours to take a decision. Like I said, there is no rule for anxiety. It is an eminently treatable condition. You will make a recovery even if you have COVID in the vast majority of people. It's only a small minority, and the minority I've just mentioned. If you are at risk, then you should be getting yourself tested and treated or even hospitalized. But that decision will come between you and your doctor. By all means, find a portal you can ask your questions or go to your local doctor or go to the closest hospital and tell them, "Look, this is what I am having. Do you think I have COVID? And I get myself tested."
And doctor, is a prescription mandatory to get a COVID test done, or can one straight away just walk into a lab and ask for a test to be done?
Not any longer. You don't need a prescription any longer. That guideline has been laid out by the task force for the state government just about 5-6 days ago. So you could very easily go to a lab testing center and say, "Look, I need to get myself tested." The problem is not so much what the law says. The problem is that out of the requirement for being comforted, there are some testing centers that will say, "No, unless we get the prescription, we're not going to test." So it makes sense to be in touch with your doctor, go to a doctor or a hospital, get the prescription. But as far as the law is concerned, you don't need a prescription. Get yourself to the closest testing center and say,
Understood, doctor. And doctor, during the course where the results are to come, say it may take 24 hours to 48 hours, are there any precautions or medications to be taken by self and the family member?
The only precaution that you need to take is to distance yourself. If it's possible, in the place that you are staying, you're living, to be in a single room for as long as can be done, and keep away from everybody. So anybody who's using, the commonest sites will be your washrooms or your kitchens. Anybody who's using any of these things should ensure that it is sanitized after you have used it. Right? If indeed there are people who are living in single rooms where there's more than one family member and they're using a common place like a washroom, the last person who uses it needs to sanitize it. Same applies to kitchen surfaces. You need to sanitize it. In the event that you are positive and you are asymptomatic when you're looking after yourself, in the event that you are positive and symptomatic, you should be looking after yourself. You should be coming to either a CCC, which is a COVID convention center, or at a hospital if your symptoms appear to be worsening over a short period of time. So that is the time that you need to be making an assessment as to whether you can be comfortable at home or you need to be evaluated in
So doctor, who decides this, that whether I can actually do a home quarantine, or do I have to go to a quarantine facility, or do I need to get admitted to the hospital? So these are the three options.
Yeah, so this is a decision that will be taken both by the patient and the doctor. You should communicate with the local BMC ward office, because the lab test that is done, that will also go to the local BMC ward office. It's a good idea to pick up the phone and talk to the ward officer and tell this person that, "Look, I am asymptomatic, I am in a place where I can quarantine myself. I don't need to go to a quarantine center." Most times what happens is that because you've not shared where you are in the state of the infection, that's the time the anxiety begins to mount, and that is the time when you will be necessarily rushed into a COVID convention center. So that's not the situation to be in. If you have tested positive, of course, the ward office will find out from the laboratory as well. But it's always a good idea to talk to the ward officer and tell them, "I'm in touch with my doctor. He will see me twice a day, or at least talk to me twice a day, and I'm comfortable in a single room in my house. I'm quite happy to be here. If I get a new symptom, I will be going to the closest hospital or to the COVID center. But until then, I should be allowed to function from my own home. And at the end of 14 days, I'll be coming out myself quarantine."
And doctor, where do we get information about which quarantine facility do I need to go to, or whether there's an availability of a bed at a hospital. Is there any place where we can get access for this information?
So there is a BMC helpline number 1916. If you think that you need to go to a place like that, please call up the number and ask them as to which is the closest COVID center closest to your home, or your office, and that they will be able to help you from there. If indeed you are so symptomatic that you need to go to a hospital, then it doesn't matter. You have to find a bed in whichever hospital is available. Please go there without any further delay, because one of the things that happens is that people tend to try and wait and see as to what might happen, and that's a mistake.
Doctor, we are also hearing about a lot of difficulty in getting hospital beds. How true is this? And is there really a shortage of hospital beds right now for COVID patients?
The acute shortage is in the ICU beds. That is where the shortage is. But there is also a move to try and decentralize. So that means if you are somebody who can be managed in your own home, then that should be adequate. Please get yourself quarantined in your own home, speak to your doctor, and make sure that 14-day period is without any further damage. The need to be hospitalized should be kept only for those patients who actually need hospital care. That means you are unwell where you can't be managed in your own home, and that is the kind of person that needs to be. So you need to be aware as to what your requirement is, and you need to be aware as to whether or not you need to go to a hospital. If you don't need to go to a hospital, you should be talking to the local office of the BMC and your doctor that I'm quite comfortable being at home and I can be managed.
We've also been hearing about some societies setting up their own ICU facilities and quarantine centers, providing for oximeters and oxygen cylinders. What is your view on this, doctor? Do you advocate this?
Yeah, so oximeter is a very good idea. Right? People should be having an oximeter. That only tells you the early part of the disease, and if it is progressing into becoming, significant, that you need to go to a hospital. The oxygen cylinder is also a very good idea, because that has also been shown in the early part of the disease. If you were to supplement oxygen, you will probably prevent the disease from going from the mild category to the moderate category, and that when there is a delay in getting into a hospital, a delay of say 4 to 6 hours, 8 hours time, that usually impacts on the severity of the disease. So not to wait. Towards that end, yes, having oxygen cylinders in a society is a very good idea. I'm not so sure about ICU beds, because there are a number of ramifications to that. You need a dedicated doctor in the society, and that if the patient is too sick, then he shouldn't be living or being treated in a society hospital or a society ICU bed. This person should be in hospital. So there really isn't a lot of medical justification to treat severe patients in that situation. But those patients who are mild or moderate, in the time that you are making an assessment whether or not you need to go to the hospital, the pulse oximeter and the oxygen is a very good idea. I encourage that.
All right, doctor. And doctor, what about the family members of the infected person? Are they also required to conduct the COVID test?
The family members come in the category of what's called first degree contacts. So yes, in somebody who's positive, they should be taking the test, only so that you know as to how many people are likely to be infected, so that they may also be in quarantine. This is more a public health measure. The point is that you want to know if there is one person, X person in a certain community or a certain geographical area, and if there were 200 cases after that over the next week's time, you want to know how this went from one person to the 200th person. So that is called contact tracing, and that is the importance of having this kind of data available to make a policy about containment zones or red zones or hot zones. That is why you need to know as to what is happening in the community. Yes, it's a good idea for people who are first degree contacts or somebody who has tested positive. It's a good idea for them to be having tested.
And doctor, there are some practical difficulties around this. So people want to know that, if your house has been marked a sticker of quarantine, and if your family members are supposed to be in the house, then how do they get this test done? Are there any protocols around this?
That is something that, again, the BMC will be able to tell you as to what is the need for quarantine. So if there is in a society, If there is one flag where somebody has been tested positive, then you don't see the whole building anymore. You simply seal up that part of the building, that floor, so that it is not going to be possibly transmitting the virus to other people in the building. That is something that will be done in conjunction with the ward officer in your area, and the kind of threat or risk, not threat, I'm sorry, wrong word, I shouldn't have used threat, the risk that it poses to other people in the house.
Understood, doctor. And doctor, typically, how long does a patient take to recover from COVID? We've been hearing about nose COVID and a throat COVID, a lung COVID. And what are the medications, in your view, that you would recommend as a treatment of COVID? And what are the medications that you think one needs to avoid?
You will be shedding the virus from, so there is a little more sensitivity of the nasopharyngeal swab because you take the swab from the nose, a little more sensitivity, but a throat swab is as good. You can have both of them so long as the person collecting the swab is familiar with the technique, is able to do it or she is able to do it correctly, and you will pick up the swab, the virus, if it is done in the proper way. That is sufficient. How long does it last? With the evidence available to us right now, after the 7th day, the period of the virus shedding starts to decrease to almost negligible. After the 7th day, the period is about the inflammation. That means, like I was mentioning earlier, if you're somebody who's got a metabolic disease that is not under control, then you will have what's called cytokine storm. These are elements in your own system that get irritated easily because of any insult. In this case, the insult is the infection, and when they get into a state of being, annoyed, irritated, for lack of a better term, they end up causing a process that will disrupt the normal mechanism of a person who is infected with COVID. So the period of infection after the 7th day is quite minimal. So 7 to 10 days is when the quarantine should be getting relaxed. But the period after the 7th day, up to about 4 weeks, maybe longer, you can have what's called the cytokine storm. So there are various strategies to address this. There are those drugs that we hear about, the remdesivir and the favipiravir, that are about to be made available in India. They seem to have a role in reducing the shedding of the virus. They are not curative, but they seem to be having a role in reducing the shedding of the virus. Also, the compounds, dexamethasone, steroids, there is a role for that as well, but that is more towards making sure that the cytokines or the inflammatory part of the disease is kept under control. There is evidence for both of these drugs that it works, but again, you have to pick your patient carefully. You've got to pick the timing carefully also. It's not just picking the patient. You've got to time it correctly so that it is going to offer the maximal benefit to the patient. Other than that, you will hear a number of things. Drugs like ivermectin, drugs like doxycycline, a number of things. The current evidence, the evidence available at this time, does not support the curative role of any of these medications. Although there are a number of places that are evaluating this. Sion Hospital is doing a very large study. Maharashtra government is also looking at these compounds quite aggressively to find out if indeed there is a role. We don't know enough as yet. There may or may not be a role. We don't know enough as yet. So only take that medication that is prescribed by your doctor, and you don't have that information through the internet. Okay, the last thing that you want to do is to treat yourself, not to take those medications that may. I'm not sure if that's going to be harmful or not, but may not benefit you. But like I said, all medications, unless you time it correctly and unless you pick the right patient, they may or may not. There's going to be a role for something like plasma therapy. That means people who got the infection, who are recovering from COVID, their plasma has antibodies to the infection. And so there may be a role for that kind of thing. We are doing a major trial at one of the hospitals. And sorry, that should become therapy very soon, in the very foreseeable future. So there are a number of promising things. It's not going to be only any one medication that will work in COVID. It's going to be a combination depending upon what stage the patient has come to you. But in a combination, you should be able to get the results that you're seeking, so that patients have a good outcome uniform. Also.
Understood, doctor. Understood. And doctor, how does one positively affirm the fact that one has recovered from COVID? How many times does one need to do the test after one has been detected with COVID?
So unless you're somebody at a high risk, that means there is somebody who's undergoing, say, dialysis, there's somebody who's undergoing chemotherapy. Those patients who are in a hospital setting where you cannot be let out in the community unless you do a test. Besides those patients, you don't need to be tested. You simply need to be quarantined, isolated for a period of 7 to 10 days, 14 days. But if you're somebody who needs dialysis, somebody who needs chemotherapy, such patients you require to have a second throat swab. Other than that, the guidelines here at this time are very clear. If you are asymptomatic and you're not at high risk, you don't need a second throat swab. You should be quarantining yourself, and after that period is over, you should be trying to get back to either the office or the community or wherever.
And doctor, is there a risk to get reinfected with the virus again?
I think that that term is being applied loosely because there are those people who will continue to show that their throat swab is positive for as long as 45 days after the infection. Right? So throat swab, see, it's a technology. It's not 100% foolproof kind of a stuff. And that the virus may be hibernating in your system for a little while and not going away completely. So there are those situations where people have tested positive, then tested negative, and then tested positive again. But I'm not sure if that is clearly not to say that you've been infected a second time. It may simply have been the first infection that has not quite gone away from your system. Do remember that a throat swab can be negative, which is a condition, a term that is called false negative. That means it is negative on the swab, but it is false. That means you still have the virus, but it is false negative. That figure is anywhere from about 25 to 30%, right? That can happen for up to 1/3 of the people who get tested. So it's not something which is set in stone. This technology of the throat swab, it's not set in stone, and you have got to take it in the context of what you're doing in testing with such patients. So I wouldn't simply say because your throat swab is negative, you don't have the virus, and that if you do the throat swab again in about say 15 days or 1 month, that comes back as being positive. That area is still a little bit gray. We don't really know whether reinfection is possible, but that will evolve over a period of time. I think as of now, if you are negative, you shouldn't be getting a self-testing again. And if you are in a high-risk situation, only then your doctor will tell you that you need to have a second test before you can go back to have the chemotherapy or the dialysis or whatever it is that you are having.
So essentially, you're saying that people with comorbidities are the ones who actually need to be more careful and get retested.
In high-risk patients, not
in high-risk patients.
You don't need to get tested if you're a hypertensive. You don't need to get tested if you're a diabetic. You don't need to get tested. So obesity also is a risk factor. BMI, about of any more than 29, that is also a risk factor. But all of these are linked to your own immune system, and that it's a state of being inflamed. It is a state of permanent inflammation. So it's linked to those things. It's not the virus that is going to be causing all the damage. It's actually the response of your own immune system that will decide the extent of the damage.
Understood, doctor. So thank you so much, doctor. I think I've covered the set of questions which had initially come from the team pertaining to COVID. So I will now be moving on to Ms. Ritika Agarwal and asking her a few questions on the anxiety and stress related issues around COVID. So Dr. Ritika, these have been very stressful times for all of us. Because a lot of social systems around us have completely collapsed. Our maids have stopped coming, children are at home, and even work-wise, I think because people are working from home, they're expected to be available all the time. So basically, people are feeling a bit overwhelmed because they are continuously physically and mentally exhausted. So what would you suggest as ways or tips for people to navigate these situations over a longer period of time?
Acknowledge what you're going through. Most times we end up saying, oh, I'm not stressed, I'm perfectly fine. So if I don't realize there's something wrong with me, I'm not going to act on it. So one, I need to acknowledge it, allow myself to feel it, and then find ways to work through it. I also need to be aware of the fact that all these negative emotions can lead to me making bad decisions. So I need to evaluate my actions, my decisions, and maybe talk it out with somebody else as well without making any rash decisions. I need to be kind to myself as well as others. So we end up being kind to others because we understand that they are going through X situation, but we rarely apply it to ourselves. So that's something that we need to do a little bit more of. So for example, say one day X task at home has not gotten done. It's fine. Don't start blaming yourself. Oh, but maybe if I had managed this correctly, or I had done this. Don't blame yourself for that. And another thing is, don't focus on what could have been. So pre-COVID, I did this. Now it's not working this way. What can I do because so and so said this to me? So as much as possible, try and avoid these situations and thoughts of yourself, because they lead to hopelessness and helplessness. And rather than that, we need to focus on how we can create an opportunity out of this, or create some system to move forward and deal with those issues through solutions. The other thing that most people are facing right now is a fear of the unknown. I don't know what to expect, and therefore. So one is important to understand that's where your concerns are coming from. So maybe attend sessions like this, or talk to your doctor. Basically understand what is it that you can do, and then you also feel like you're doing something to protect yourself, and try and avoid the news. Because most people all they're doing is following the numbers like it's a cricket match or something happening, which is not a very good idea. The only thing that we need to look at when we're looking at the numbers is making sure we protect ourselves so we don't add on to those numbers. So like Dr. Oki, do all the precautions, though that's something we should all be doing. We should also recognize that some level of anxiety at this time is normal, because stress and anxiety is basically a way of coping. Earlier it was to make sure that you stayed alive. Now there are a lot of other situations that are do or die situations. So this is basically, it's normal. So we need to stop beating ourselves up about how I shouldn't be anxious, I shouldn't be sad. It's perfectly fine. It's only if it starts interfering with our daily functioning. So I'm not able to get out of bed. I don't feel like eating. I don't feel like doing anything. I think that's something that we need to address urgently. Another very good option when everyone's at home is to try and create a schedule for everyone. So everyone creates their own. It's not done for them. And then you try and match it, so that basically what happens when you match it with each other, everyone gets quality time with each other. At the same time, you've gotten everything done. And the family now needs to try and come together to try and help each other out. So now we need to try and break the barriers that we've created for ourselves over this is my job, that's your job. It needs to be this is our job, and let's try and figure out how we can do it. We need to try and again look at credible sources of information so that we're not getting panicky over things like that. We need to solidify our social system, our support system basically. Because a lot of people, when you say social distancing, the first thing is, I can't meet anyone, I can't do this, I haven't met anybody in so long. But we need to remember that we maybe met them online, and that is also okay at this point. So it's more about focusing on the fact that it's physical distancing, not maybe social in that sense. And we need to look after ourselves, so getting good sleep, eating well, exercising, doing things we enjoy. And now while we're talking about social distancing, a lot of people are talking about connecting with friends and family, but we also should use this time to connect with ourselves, because a lot of times we don't understand where we're going wrong either. So maybe allowing ourselves to accept the negatives as well as the positives and work on ourselves to look at self-improvement. Maybe try and do things like journaling if you're anxious. So try and keep a daily record. The idea is that I find I can vent a lot easier if I'm talking to a journalist compared to maybe talking to a family member or friend. I may not be comfortable sharing everything. Focus on the things that you can control. So if I can't control, for example, I can control the fact that I've taken all precautions. I still may not be able to control 100% actually getting COVID or not. But I have done everything I can control. And then I need to leave the rest. Okay, now I've got it, maybe let's focus on the doctors handling it. So let's give the control to them and not be overly panicky about, but what medicine, why are you giving me this, what is this? So trust the other person as well. Look at maybe random acts of kindness, because basically the research has found that if you have one random act of kindness, you have endorphins released, so you're in a much better mood. You feel more likely to go and do it for somebody else. Somebody else who experiences that act of kindness is also likely to feel happier and pass it forward. Someone who sees the act is also likely to feel better and pass it on. So it's a lot easier as a method of being happy. We can use this time, in fact, even for gratitude. So maybe at home, everyone can keep a small little jar, maybe in a common area, the drawing room or something, and a little pads of with little papers and pens, and everyone can write down what it is that they're feeling thankful for. So maybe, for example, a teenager who says, "Thanks, mom, appreciate the effort." So even small things like that on a day-to-day basis, we just ignore it. No one cares. But I didn't focus on the thank you, maybe. So just small things like that. At the end of the day or the week, depending on how many people are at home, everyone can sit down together and read these journals. So in a way, what happens is it kind of bonds the family together, which then would help get through this period of time. And then try and do support groups with your friends, family, practice mindfulness, deep breathing exercises for relaxation. Ideally, when you're doing deep breathing, try and do abdominal breathing. So all of these things would help with relaxation during this time.
Great, doctor. All very useful tips, and I'm sure a lot of us will be able to relate to some of the things that you said. So we basically have to be easy on ourselves at this moment more than anything else. Dr. Ritika, also, we have children at home and they're completely devoid of any social activity at the moment. So are there any things that we need to specifically watch out for right now? And how do we take care of this void for them at the moment?
So one we need to remember, children are probably more resilient than us. So not all children are unhappy. So a lot of kids I've spoken to have actually been really happy because there's no more bullying. There's free time.
My son definitely forms a part of that group.
There's also a lot of time with family, which maybe earlier mom and dad both were working. Now mom and dad are home all the time to cater to my needs. So we also look at that, and from that perspective, so we don't assume at the start that the child is upset. Maybe have a conversation with the child about what they're feeling. For that, you need to open up about yourself as well. A child is going to be uncomfortable talking about being anxious or upset if mom or dad always, everything's fine, I'm never upset. So one, we need to have that frank conversation with them. We need to spend quality time so that they have, maybe even if it's not friends, but family is there as quality time. And we have to keep reminding them they don't have to deal with it alone. Just make a call and call up a friend. So yes, social media is going to increase for most of them, which is a huge concern for parents. But we need to mention that right now our own social media timelines have gone off. So theirs are also going to go off. So we need to be understanding about that. But maybe try and have more play dates, or try and have more time where maybe they're playing games online together. Maybe working on things like a time capsule for journaling their time through this. So maybe comparing notes, learning from each other. I dealt with this in this way. Why don't you try it out? So coming from a parent is different from coming from a friend, especially during the teenagers. The parents don't really matter as much as the friend's opinion does. So try and encourage that kind of conversation. For younger kids, try and maybe talk them about what is happening, why they're not able to go out. So there are a lot of resources available. For example, WHO has a comic on their website, which helps you teach the child the same story which we've just gone through, but in a way that's easily understandable, explains the facts without being scary. So, and a lot of people have come out with comics like that. So you can just go online and find any number. So again, once they understand what is happening, it's less scary for them. So they'll be okay with not meeting their friends. Mom, it's fine, I'll just talk to them on the phone. But if I don't understand, there are going to be temper tantrums, there are going to be fights at home, but why can't I? Why are you stopping me? Who are you to stop me? That then creates conflict, which is going to be difficult to manage. For kids, it's also important, along with our routines, it's important for them to have a routine. So again, most classes are online today. But so try and create a schedule that this time is maybe study time, this time is free play. Because again, the free play is something that so far most of our kids don't really get as such. It's just this class, that class, that class. Now we've got an opportunity to give them free play. I think it's important to do so. Maybe teach them life skills. So maybe cooking, sewing, money management, and in a fun manner, so that it's not that I'm stuck doing this. Mom's doing it, why don't you help out? Or dad's doing it, why don't you help out? So again, breaking the boundaries in that sense, also the gender boundaries that exist. Use this time for kids to connect with extended family. So maybe, especially their grandparents, even if it's a grand uncle, grand aunt, have them call them up every now and then. So maybe you set an example and have them call up. Another thing that they can do with grandparents is try and create a family tree, for example, or any member of the family who has enough information. So again, connects them to their roots. It makes them feel a part of something that's a lot larger than just them plus parents or whoever's in the house. So these are good ways for the children to manage through this period of social isolation in that sense.
Thank you, Ms. Agarwal. And I know you touched upon this briefly in the first question, but you know it's very easy to for panic to set in when one is detected with COVID. So can you please elaborate a bit more on how can we maintain a positive frame of mind at that time?
So one thing we need to understand is that not just as the patient, but even as family, that the patient is going to be anxious. So some level of anxiety or negative thoughts are going to come in. As much as possible, whenever we say don't think about this, that's what we think of. So for example, if I say chocolates now, everyone has thought of their favorite chocolate. So the idea is don't keep telling yourself, I cannot think of negative thoughts. I have to be positive, because then that's creating pressure on yourself, which again, you're not really being kind to yourself. So rather than that, try and reframe the thoughts and try and repeat that positive thoughts to yourself. The positive thought should be something that you kind of believe in at least. So maybe, for example, recovery rates are good. So I will do well. I will get out of this. I'm doing well now. I have gotten so much better. So these kind of things are things that you can believe in and yet stay positive without feeling that I'm lying to myself. The other thing is, for example, the grounding exercise that a lot of people can do. Usually when you're anxious, you can't focus on a single thing. So a grounding exercise is basically something that helps you focus on the task at hand. So maybe like look around you, find 5 things that you can actually see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Now the idea of this is that all of these things are usually in the environment, but we rarely pay attention to an actual sound. Maybe kids are playing in the background, we've zoned it out because we're busy working. So the thing is, when you're doing a grounding exercise, you're very aware of your surroundings, which helps you be completely present in that moment. That when you're completely present, you're not thinking about the future. What will happen now? The doctor's going to come. What's he going to say? So and so at home is upset probably. What should I do? So and so's calling me. So these kind of thoughts kind of reduce. So it helps a little bit. Another important thing is to clarify your doubts. A lot of times patients are uncomfortable asking the doctor, but doctor, what does this mean? I didn't understand what you said. Oh, no, doctor will feel bad. How can I ask? So then the doubts keep increasing in their own minds, and that creates panic because I don't have answers. So one is, it's important to be open with your doctor. I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said. Could you please explain that? Be medically compliant. That eases the worry for the doctor as well as yourself. Remind yourself that it's normal to go through this situation. A lot of people are testing positive, but they're also recovering. So focus on that recovery rate. Try and again look at creating maybe a journal for yourself of the time you've been isolated. Connect virtually with your family and friends. This is the time where it's important because a lot of people are worried about the stigma, but break out of that stigma and talk to family and friends, and you'll actually be surprised that a lot of them are very helpful and are there for you. Make sure you're sleeping well. So create a bedtime routine maybe for yourself. Half an hour before bed, no TV, no mobile, same routine every night. So all of this would help you sleep better, which by default will make you feel a little better in the morning. Most important, again, avoid the news if you can at that point, especially because you're already worried. And if you find that any of your negative symptoms are affecting your daily functioning, you should definitely consult a mental health professional so that you nip it in the bud and you don't wait for it to become full-blown anxiety or depression. So yeah.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Ms. Agarwal. All very, very helpful tips. Uh, so now we've almost completed an hour of the session. So I will start reading the questions from the audience and then pose them to both of you all, depending on the nature of the question. Dr. Om, I think the first question is for you, wherein somebody wants to know that, in a given family, there were two people who tested positive, but the rest of the family, though living together, tested negative. So what could be the possible explanation for such a scenario?
It's not necessary that everybody who is exposed to a positive patient is going to get the infection at the same time. It's not necessary. It could be different exposures for different times. And that is also possible that one person who has infected two of the family members, if you're asking, the response of the other members of the family was different in that the immune response was different. So the virus may have come into the patient's system but not cause an infection. That's known to happen. That's quite likely also. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have been exposed to somebody, one, the virus will be in your system, two, it will cause an infection. So I wouldn't be surprised in that kind of situation. It's a fairly common kind of story.
Understood, doctor. And I believe there are some hypertension patients in the audience, so they would like to know that if somebody has hypertension and they have been under medication for as long as 10 years, do they need to take any special precautions? Do they have a higher risk? I think you did answer that to some extent, but can you care to elaborate a bit more, doctor?
So that's, I think the biggest comorbidity that has been established is hypertension and not any other thing at this time at least. Of course, like I said earlier, these are early days. We'll probably revise as to what the patterns are every day, every week, every month from here, so long as the infection is around. Hypertension is a certain risk factor, yes, so very important to make sure that your doctor knows that you are adequately controlled. You need to have your blood pressure under control. You need to take your medications adequately. You need to follow your instructions from your doctor. Simple things like your salt intake and your body weight and alcohol consumption, cigarette, tobacco. If indeed these are things that you are keeping, and that, like I said earlier as well, your metabolic state is under control. The key is the metabolic state. If your metabolic state is not under control, now how do you come to that conclusion? There are blood tests. There are risk factors for vascular events in people who are at higher risk in various categories. So your doctor should be able to tell you that. We can do that for you at Justlow Hospital if you'd like. We've also got the testing facility at Justlow Hospital. We can do the full swab for you. Indeed, if you'd like to have that test done here. So important that it's not just the hypertension tablets, but also quantifying the risk of a cardiovascular event or a cerebrovascular event or a kidney event or something else. There are blood tests that can be done, that should be done in case you are at a higher risk for COVID and its complications.
All right, doctor. If we were to create something like a COVID kit at home comprising medicines and maybe some basic equipment, what are the top items that you would recommend for having such a kit at home?
You are going to need about 4 or 5 things. The pulse oximeter is the most important thing. That is one. The oxygen concentrator or an oxygen cylinder, depending upon what you prefer and what is available. That is the second thing. The hand sanitizer is the third thing. You must make sure that you are keeping every surface that you touch is clean. The face mask is, of course, the other important thing. You only need those parts of in medical parts that are basic things, so that you're not having fevers, you're not having vomiting, things to help you with those kind of things. There may be a role for something like hydroxychloroquine, but you should take that only under medical supervision. Please talk to the doctor or talk to me, talk to Justlow Hospital. Try and see what is best for your situation at that time, but not to take medications unless they are under medical supervision. So some basic things to cope with the situation that is now under control. If it stays under control for the next 10 days time, then you don't need any of these things. If it doesn't, then at least you have prepared for the eventuality before it became one, and that you are taking the step in the right direction.
Fine, doctor. Doctor, people want to know if there are any side effects of using a hand sanitizer frequently, because we are using it so many times now compared to before.
So there is some evidence. The hand sanitizer must have once a minimum of the alcohol concentration. It's got to be at least 70%. When you use it that frequently, you're using it 50 times a day, there is going to be a little bit of skin irritation, some amount of erosion, and some amount of skin peeling also, because it's not just the palms, but the other side of the hand that you are going to be using this. There is known to be a small amount of skin irritation and skin peeling when you're using it that many times. Other than that, 70% alcohol is a fairly safe proportion. It should be fine.
All right, doctor. If we have elderly people staying with us, are there any additional precautions that we need to take, especially for those who are traveling out for work?
So again, like I mentioned, age is something that we do consider risk factor. Any age over 65 or 70 years is known to be having some amount of higher risk of infection and higher risk of complication. But that is also, like I mentioned also earlier, it is not about the age so much as it is about your immune system. So you can be a very fit 70-year-old, 80-year-old, 85-year-old, 90-year-old also, and you can be an unfit 25, 30-year-old. So it is a matter of ensuring that your immune system is competent enough to fight off the infection if indeed you would be exposed.
Doctor, there is a concern that we don't have enough doctors and trained nurses. So people want to know that is the government doing anything to address the situation? What is your view on this?
Yes, the government is doing a great deal. Please remember that there is no government or infrastructure that can prepare for an epidemic of this kind. Right? I'm not aware of any country anywhere in the world, even where the infrastructure is more robust, far stronger, because the infrastructure that we have and the power, the government of the day in power is doing the best that it can. Right? You'll never be able to have empty beds and excess doctors and excess nurses in this kind of situation anywhere in the world. If you were to look at the most robust health systems in the world, they're also having challenges when you have this kind of manner. So is the government doing enough? I think the government is doing what it can. We should be cognizant of that and we should try and appreciate that. There is always scope to do more. Yes, there is. But that does not mean it is not doing what it can. So if you look at the scaling, in the last 3 months itself, India started with doing about 200 tests a day. As of this morning, India is doing 3 lakh tests a day. In the next 3 weeks' time, India will probably be doing 5 lakh tests a day. Right? So what can be done is being done. But do remember, when you say, is there enough doctors, nurses? Well, there are logistic difficulties. There are people who are willing to work, but in the lockdown, you don't have a train or a bus that comes from, say, parts of, say Ghatkopar or the interior or from Vasai or Virar. There are logistic difficulties of people, even if they want to come and work, they're not able to do it because of the lockdown. So there are challenges, they are being overcome, and what can be done is being done to the best of its
Got it, doctor. Ms. Agarwal, since this is a session for all corporate employees, are there any specific tips for managers that you would like to provide to maybe ease the stress and anxiety level amongst their team?
So when it comes to working from home, one is it's very important for the manager or the team leader to be trust the employees with working, for which the employees also need to show some level of autonomy, responsibility. They need to plan their day out properly. Having said that, for the mindset right now for most people so far has always been, I want to work from home. Now that there is work from home, it's not by choice. And therefore that mindset is something that also maybe you consider as a team and work out. The most employees at this point that I've spoken to are complaining about their work-life balance being completely off track. So I would say a team leader is someone, or a manager is someone who can actually help them out with this. Maybe have a discussion with your team in terms of what are the working hours, what time of the day would you call or not call. You're in a position to do that for your team, and hopefully others will see you doing that. It will go up the ranks as well. Empathize with your team situation. help the team also upskill. So this is a time when that's probably doable a lot better. Be honest with your team. A lot of people, current complaints are HR didn't tell us this, or my boss knew about this. They knew I was going to get fired, but they left it to the last minute, or salary issues. So a lot of this, if you're honest with your employees or with your team, it's going to be a lot easier for them to accept it. They'll be willing to accept more. So the chances of you having a good outcome are better. Maybe work on team dynamics through team building activities. So I know a lot of teams that are doing different talent competitions, different get to know each other sessions, for example, in bigger offices. Another challenge is Zoom fatigue, because there's just too many meetings on Zoom. So maybe try and organize how often you need to have them in a week or in a day, so that you're working through that fatigue as well. For employees, for you to have a time where you feel a little bit like you're in office, make sure you get dressed for the day before you actually sit down to work. Try and build transition into and out of your work day, so that you know that's when you would have normally traveled to work and back. That way your boss or your team manager also knows when you're going to come in and when you're leaving work. Create a workspace at home with minimal distractions. Take breaks, maybe tea, coffee breaks that you would take earlier. Call up a colleague, call up your boss, whoever you're comfortable with. So that way your contact resumes with them. You still get your break. You get time with family and friends, because you're getting your space after work hours. So I think it's important for managers and their teams to work together through this time, maybe a little more than they would earlier, but it's important.
All right, Ms. Agarwal. Dr. Om, there is one question pertaining to toddlers and infants. So is there any other precaution to be taken for toddlers when taking them outdoors? Because they tend to really not understand much about social distancing and sanitization. So are there any specific tips on that?
No, there's no specific tip, except like I mentioned earlier, within the acceptable limits, you should try and see that can be maintained. And if at all the toddler is touching surfaces that he or she should not do, then you just try and clean their hands as many times as possible. I know it's a practical situation, it's a difficult situation, but you still have to do the best that you can. There are no extraordinary or exceptional tips for that situation. Simply a lot of what can be done during that within permissible or acceptable limits should be.
Understood, Doctor. I think I have covered majority of the questions here. Some of the questions are repeated and you've already covered them in the course of these answers. So I will ask the team again if there are any further questions that they would like to ask, or then we can perhaps move on to conclude the session. Doctor, there is one last question. How safe is it to travel by air?
Within acceptable limits, yes. I think if you must travel at this time, going to a place where you want to go, whether it is domestic or it is international, you will still have to go through the process of evaluation and quarantine. If you must travel, if it can't be done in any other way, by all means, yes. Certainly, you're not going to go for a holiday at this time, yes. The only holiday spots are going to be where you can drive down right now, and that also with restrictions. But air travel, if you must travel, yes, by all means, you need to go through the restrictions of the newer guidelines of air travel. So, quarantine and face masks and shields, evaluation, all of those things will happen. If you must, by all means, go ahead.
Great. All right. So once again, a very big thank you, Dr. Om, for taking time to join us for this session today. We know you're a busy man, so we truly, truly appreciate you being here today and taking all our questions and giving such wonderful answers. And thank you so much, Ms. Agarwal, for being present today as well. Some very wonderful, practical, handy tips that you have provided, and I'm sure we'll all greatly benefit from it. I will now leave the session over to Mr. Sanjay Dutt, the CEO of the two companies, to just conclude the session for today.
Thank you very much. My thanks first of all to two organizations, Just Log Hospital and Log Into Health. And Jia, you did a wonderful job steering this. I couldn't have imagined you covering so much in such a short period of time.
Thank you so much.
Special thanks to Dr. Om Srivastav and Ritika Agarwal for answering every question and in such a manner that it was so easy to understand. My one simple takeaway is I know which doctor I'll be calling and which expert I'll be taking from. And Jia, I'm not trying to impress you. While this session was going on, I've logged into and become a member of Log Into Health.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. That means so much.
No, not all. And the last advice which came from Ritika, I think I can apply with my wife and family almost on everyday basis. So really grateful. All were extremely valuable inputs. And I think we are grateful that such senior doctors and experts come and share this with us. So really, once again, sincere thanks. And Jia, you did precisely.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Absolutely, it was absolutely delightful to be here today and to conduct this webinar, and truly appreciative of the opportunity that you've provided. And thank you once again, Dr. Om and Ms. Ritika Agarwal. It was a wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was really, really enjoyable. And I hope that we connect again soon. All the best.